we're going to be talking about health and about health technology, healthcare, and health innovation. We invited two super insightful and interesting people who will tell us what they think the future is going to hold and how we can prepare for that. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Maria Chatzou, Dr. Maria Chatzou, and Max Kelly. So welcome. Thank you for coming and being here on our stage. I would like to start by asking you one simple question. Please raise your hand if you have heard about the company Lifebit AI. Okay, a few. Who has heard about Techstars? Okay, most of you. So let's start with you, Maria. Can you please tell us something about your company and why did you decide to build it?
Sure. Can you hear me? Okay, cool. So basically, both myself and my co-founder, we are computer scientists by background, which we then turned into bioinformaticians, turned into researchers, and eventually turned into entrepreneurs. And for anyone that, you know, has chosen the route to be a researcher, is clearly not for the money or the glory, right? It's mainly for the impact, right? So a lot of the work that we did while being researchers allowed us to see a lot of potential on for helping and disrupting different things that were happening in the biotech sector, that are happening in the biotech sector. And then we saw a huge opportunity to jump and actually create Lifebit. And the overarching mission of Lifebit is really to accelerate life by, you know, by enhancing our understanding of the big biological and biomedical data, and therefore helping us to understand better, you know, why we're humans, why, you know, how everything works around us. You know?
So there's a big mission. We have 1 hour to figure it out. So I'm curious. Max, we know what Techstars is. You are also an entrepreneur, and you built a few companies. The most famous probably is the Virgin brand empire. You co-founded Vision Mobile US. And you also did something with Virgin, which is connected to health. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I'm Max. I worked at Virgin Group for about 12 years, and my job was to start new companies for the Virgin Group. And so when I was doing that, I started in about 2001, and when I told people I was starting companies, they were like, "What the fuck is that?" Because entrepreneurship was not a thing. So it was very interesting to be doing that initially. I started Virgin Mobile in the US, which went from 0 to $1 billion of revenue within 18 months. So that just flew. It was kind of right time, right place. Did the same thing in Canada with Bell Mobility, because we were piggybacking on Sprint in the US and on Bell in Canada. The third company I started was Virgin Health Bank, which was an umbilical cord stem cell bank. So that was cryogenically freezing stem cells from the placenta. And the reason for doing that was primarily because Richard Branson said, why don't we do something in stem cells? Because George Bush doesn't think that stem cell research is a good idea. It was literally that level of sophistication. We tried to find something that was not just scientific research, that it was something actually business-minded. So we did that. The final company I started at Virgin was Virgin Insight, which was aggregating all of the data from all of the different companies, putting that in one place, and then using that to inform strategy and marketing. And one of the things that we did there was pull in all of the data from the hospital episode statistics, the HES data, which is basically all of the data of the NHS. So looking episode by episode across the entire NHS. It's an amazing data set. And we were looking at where to locate clinics across the whole of the UK, across different pathologies. So kind of coming here, I was like, I'm not sure that I know much about health. And then I realized I'd done 2 health-related things at Virgin, and I've invested in 5 or 6 health companies subsequently. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Okay. So that's useful to know that you have interesting health innovation background. Now, before we go any further, If you want to jump in and ask any questions, feel free. It's super simple. All you have to do is just go to this website behind us, slido.com, and the hashtag you use is just SG Europe. That's it. No need to download any app. You just open your browser, go to slido.com, use the hashtag, and ask away. I promise the top 5 questions will be answered, maybe more. Which ones you can decide, because you can like questions which you want to be having an answer for. So we'll do that. Maria, how did you meet with Max?
That's a funny story. So basically, I was pitching the company for the first time at the Women Who Tech Startup Challenge 2017. And Max was one of the judges. And I guess I won one of the 2 awards there. And Max really liked the vision, really liked everything we have done, sort of like working as researchers, and what we wanted to do moving forward. So then we started chatting, and I think it was very funny because he was telling me, oh, you know, like I really love to have you at Techstars, but you are too early. And I'm like, oh yeah, great, then we'll come. Because in my mind, he meant like we are still early enough for the applications, where he was the polite way saying like, you have yet nothing as a startup, so you're not yet Techstars ready. But then, yeah, I guess he liked everything. And then he was like, but regardless, I really want to help you. And then we started chatting. And then from there, he gave me a great opportunity to interview for Techstars. And then somehow I made it.
Okay, well done. Max, when you meet young founders and entrepreneurs, how do you decide which ones are the real deal? How do you spot the entrepreneurs who are worth investing in, your energy and so on?
So we would get, so Techstars London, which is the one I ran for three classes, we'd get around about 100 applications, and 1,000 applications, and we'd choose about 10. So when we were kind of deciding, it was, because we're so early, some of these companies are so early, we would always choose on team. So what we say is team, market, traction, idea. And so the idea is actually the bottom of the pile. And the thing that's most important is the team themselves, because almost all of the startups will change or will be buffeted by the realities of the market they're entering. And when that happens, they need to be able to adapt and modify what they're doing. And that comes down to having an amazing team. We tend to look for co-founders rather than sole founders. If you look at the data, co-founders perform well as compared to sole founders. That does not mean that if you're a sole founder, you won't succeed. I want to be clear about that. And we do every now and then, as an exception, take sole founders. And then it's very interesting because, I talked about the stuff that I did at Virgin. I've also started up other companies, advised hundreds of companies. But what I've realized only in about the last 12 months is that I'm not really an entrepreneur. And the reason for that is because I am massively curious, and I want to find the solution. I want to understand things in a way that no one has ever done that before and make it incredibly simple. Once I've understood that, I'm kind of moving on to the next thing. The reality of being an entrepreneur is actually that's the first 1% of getting somewhere, or maybe the first 5%, but the 95% is perseverance, absolute execution, all of these things. And so when we're looking into kind of what traits the entrepreneur has, it's like, how do we know that they will run through walls, they will just make this shit happen no matter what?
Okay. Maria, how did you find when you joined Techstars? How was your experience? And after joining Techstars, did you raise funding immediately or it took some time?
So I always say this, that when we entered Techstars, we just had the project. We didn't have a company, right? When we finished Techstars, then we had the company, and I always say that. So for us, Techstars was transformational, and of course, I'm forever grateful to Max and all of his work. And I'm also, I'll say, a little bit difficult sometimes. So Max had to, we had like a lot of fun moments. I think Techstars is totally worth it. Every accelerator, accelerators in general, are an expensive things to have in your cap table. So if you are to do an accelerator, then you need to choose wisely. 1 and 2, you need to make the most out of it, right? I saw, and there are, companies, I've been to Techstars, they are not making the most out of Techstars, and obviously then, they have less chances of fundraising successfully and continuing successfully. I tried to do my best. I gave it my all. And then I always say, I just followed Techstars playbook for pretty much everything. And then just after Techstars, I started fundraising. So I followed protocol. And it was very successful. Within 2 months, I fundraised over $3 million. I had an oversubscribed round with more than $10 million
who are your
on the
investors?
table. So my investors are 2 big London VCs.
Which ones?
Pentech and Connect Ventures.
Okay.
And then we have one micro VC as well, which is called Beacon Capital. And the only reason why they're in my round is because Maria was a mentor during, the partner leading that was a mentor during Techstars, and she was the most helpful person.
Okay. So congrats on going through Techstars accelerator and fundraising. Max, Techstars is known for being one of the largest accelerator groups in the world. You have 50, we discussed earlier. Do you have any focus, because you also do this partnership with big brands? Do you have any focus on health tech?
Yeah, specific. Well, I'm going to take a quick step back. Don't regard this as some sort of commercial for Techstars. There are lots of companies, most great companies succeed without an accelerator. So I always think that if people are interested in an accelerator, it's just a means to an end, which is a successful business rather than the end in its own right. Yeah. And there are other good accelerators, but only do a good accelerator. Don't waste your time. In terms of Techstars itself, we partner with a bunch of large companies. There's about 80 partners that we have. They represent about 4% of global GDP.
Wow.
Yeah, which is pretty huge, actually. We had Cedars-Sinai, who we ran, I think, 3 or 4 programs with over in the US. We've now switched from them to United Healthcare. So we have dedicated health tech accelerators and have done that. We see a ton of applications in the health, and we'll get on to why that is as we discuss.
So in health, you said you have some programs?
Yeah, so the one that we currently have is United Healthcare in partnership in the US. But we have, MetLife, who does, health insurance. There's just a ton of stuff. We see it across a whole bunch of different ones. And then things like Techstars London, which don't have a vertical focus, we get lots of applications for health as well.
I was at an event on health tech yesterday, and there was like a very core health tech event, and there was a discussion about there are these 2 worlds. One is healthcare, and the other world is technology. And sometimes it's very hard to cross these worlds, because on one side you have the hardcore doctors and scientists and people who understand the health side, but not much the business side. And you have also VCs who focus on that part, but it's hard to bring them together. Maria, in your experience, how do you find, when you try to build a successful business as an entrepreneur, how do you find building technology which is able to survive the business and become scalable?
So first of all, if you're operating in the biotech sector, right, you need to, exactly as you said, right, you can either be a more biological focused company, and therefore you need to choose investors that do understand that that they need to pour millions in and wait for years and years without returns, right? You're wasting money, or them, or you need to, realize that you're a biotech that is a technology company at the end of the day, and therefore I would seriously advise to then go for investors that are more tech investors, but also then play that game, right? Where you are scaling fast, you're getting into market as soon as possible. Although, being a biotech inherently, you're a deep tech company by definition, right? Regardless if it takes you, if you're manufacturing a drug and takes you 10 years to do that, or if you are doing some sort of software which takes you anything between 3 to 5 years to actually get something very proper into the market.
Okay.
So regardless, I would say the way to do it is, first of all, identify which team are you actually playing for, and then choose wisely your investors and choose wisely your team, and then take it from there. How to become scalable? I think one of the biggest challenges, at least we have, and I think we'll keep having, is that there is literally no good, there is, the lean startup Bible out there, which unfortunately doesn't apply that well for deep tech companies.
Why not?
And the biggest challenge is that if you are a deep tech company, then you need to somehow make those learnings of the lean startup way of thinking work for you. And that has been one of the biggest challenges
Max, what do you think?
when it comes to scaling.
So in terms of investment dollars in the world, general kind of rule of thumb, about 70% of it goes into tech, 10% into life science and biotech, 10% into renewable, and 10% everything else. So if you're pitching, you know, actually somewhere in the intersection of life sciences / biotech and then technology, you kind of want to make sure that you're clear on what that pitch is. And you want to know exactly who you're pitching to and why. So that's just on the funding side. What was the other part of the question?
There's one question which I discovered here, which is linked to what we're talking about, and I'm going to bring it up. Do you think what happened with Theranos has affected the appetite for investments in biotech? What do you think about that?
What has happened with... Oh, God.
Because you have the big strategic view of the market. How do what happened to Theranos is affecting the industry?
So I would go even more macro than that, which is just like there is a, you know, from like early 2000s when I was starting at Virgin and no one was an entrepreneur at all, to now where people aren't going to investment banking or consulting out of an MBA, they want to be an entrepreneur. This is a huge change. There has been no clear out. So the last recession was 2008. We're at 2019. This is the longest bull run we've ever had. I think there's just not enough shakeout in the market of real companies, and that will happen when we get a downturn. So I think whilst everything's going up and there's money available, then you can pull money in, and as she did in Theranos, you know, that's not going to be an isolated case. There's going to be lots of companies that raise a lot of money that are going to go to the wall, not just in health tech, but everywhere. That is going to be a brutal wake-up call, particularly for a lot of the millennials who've never been through a downturn, who are going to go, holy shit, this is not how the world works. It always goes up, right? And that's not the way that it works. And so an entrepreneur is going to be hardest hit. So, yeah. Sorry, that's a slightly long way round of saying, is it going to affect biotech? Yeah, it will. Is it going to affect it disproportionately? Probably in the short term, but in the long term, no.
Okay, cool. Now, talking about, Marian, you mentioning that health is a deep tech, usually deep tech industry, deep tech area, and there is lots of money needed in this space. Are you able to explain your vision to investors and make sure they understand that the business cannot be profitable in 1 year after you start? Is the patience part of the pitching for big investors?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, even tech investors, right? They do understand what a deep tech company means, right? It's not that, you know, there are investors that are investing into flying cars, right? Literally.
We did, yes.
So exactly, right? So obviously do understand you're not going to get money tomorrow, right? So obviously tech investors, which are the case of my investors, they do understand that, and they invested on the thesis that at least for 3 years we're not going to have any substantial revenues, and we're not going to even try to chase revenues per se, but rather, you know, building the technology, building this, you know, solid community of, you know, beta users, partners to get something very solid out there and then scale, right? And so, yeah, it's just that you need to explain your vision, you need to explain, you know, your whys, you need to explain basically everything, but in a quantifiable way, where you say, like, here's what I want to do. Now, here's the big vision, right? Now, here's all of the milestones to reach this vision. And this is, you know, in terms of number, what that looks like, right? And this is what I need from you, right? And if the investors do not understand that, and they're like, oh, what are your revenue projections? Then stop talking to them. Just go to another investor, right?
Max, when you think about Lifebit, you said you invested first in people and teams. So you like Maria and her spirit as an entrepreneur. What do you think about the business itself, Lifebit? And what do you think it can be making a major impact?
This is quite fun because I could say nice things about Maria on stage. She pitched this, and it really was. So it's women who tech. It was in City Hall, and it was all about, you know, kind of really early stage. And she gets up on stage and just has an amazing charisma about, and then, oh yeah, she's done it again today. Forgot to say, oh yeah, I've got a doctorate in bioinformatics. And by the way, half of the companies in the world are using my open source code that me and my co-founder have developed, and therefore we know the entire industry. You know, a few things along the way where it's like, holy shit, this is amazing what this person has done, or the two of them had done. So, but one of the frustrations I always had with her is that she forgets to say things like that in front of people, which are quite impressive. So the thing that was a challenge, because one of the other companies that I invested in previously had come out of EF, Avalon AI, and they were two PhD guys, and they were looking at brain scans, MRI scans of the brain to try and anticipate using AI early onset of Alzheimer's, so that you could actually take preventive action before full onset. Those guys just didn't have the entrepreneurial capability, and then Maria comes in and has this kind of hunger, an unbelievable drive, which is one thing we're looking for. And then Pablo, her co-founder, he's, you know, kind of quite, techie in the most techie possible way that you can imagine, but super nice guy, suddenly realizes that he loves entrepreneurship, and it was fantastic. That was super lucky, but we did probe that when we were taking them.
Now, discussing the future of health, we need to discuss what is the present. And today, Maria, in your eyes, what do you think is in today's healthcare system working and you would keep, and which areas do you think should be disrupted first?
So I think there are a lot of things that work very, very well for healthcare today. But some of the areas that definitely has to be disrupted are the way we think about...
Which ones are working today?
Which ones
working
are
well?
Working well.
Give us like 2, 3.
Everything from, the fact that even you have access to your doctor, and you can go to your doctor at any point, you can get exams, you can get surgeries. I think all of those areas, right, they are a little bit problematic, but if you think that half of the planet has no access to anything like that whatsoever, right, those areas do work very, very well. The areas that do not work very, very well is that we are a very sort of like disease-centered way of thinking healthcare. Like, okay, you need to be sick to see a doctor. You need to be sick to do something about you. And our whole generation, right? Millennials are much better now. We were just like, okay, let's live healthier. But like, we're still trained to not actually, monitor and take control over our health. So I think prevention is one of the biggest areas where I think there's a lot of disruption to happen. We're already seeing it. We're seeing incredible startups coming in. To some extent, Lifebit is providing the fundamental technology for these companies to actually, come and build and do incredible things.
How do you monitor your health, and how do you see what your benchmark is?
In terms of monitoring your health, there are so many things. I mean,
what do you do
what I personally do? Well, I have a Fitbit, right? So let's start with that. I try to similar things with Max. I try to sleep as much as I can, which being an entrepreneur, it can be challenging sometimes. Try to eat healthy, try to be much more organic in the way that I eat, try to not eat processed food at all, basically. So basically, I take a lot of vitamins, nutrients, so be very mindful about how I am boosting my immune system and how I'm keeping my body away from toxins, basically, and I'm nutritioning properly, right?
Max, you mentioned, when we discussed earlier, you mentioned a few main points which are helpful to think about when you think about health prevention. Do you remember those?
So I was interested to know what we die of. So there's a great website, an NHS one actually, which basically just tells you what you die of. And so I looked at the top 10 and then compared that to say, okay, let's look at the both US and UK recommendations as to how to avoid those things, whether it's, something, heart disease or cancer or whatever. So I then looked at all of the preventative stuff that you can do. It turns out there are only about 5 things that you can do once you boil it all down. One is sleep, the second is exercise, the third is nutrition, the fourth is social contact, the fifth is rest and relaxation, which kind of overlaps with sleep, and then there's some avoid toxins stuff, like, you know, don't smoke, low alcohol and stuff like that. The kind of context for that is I don't know how health is going to be paid for in the future. In the US, $1 in $5, so 20% of GDP is spent on health. That is an entirely unsustainable model, and that number is increasing as a percentage of GDP. So, you can't just continue. We used to die of communicable diseases when we were young. Now we die of chronic diseases when we're old. Chronic disease is it's massively expensive for the last sort of 5 to 10 years of life, and we're prolonging that period of unhealthiness. Yeah. That just increases cost. That's unsustainable. The whole system's going to break. So the only way that you can kind of address that is by having preventative stuff, and people have to take personal responsibility. That's kind of my view. I think it's tough.
Last year there was maybe you've seen the TED Talk with Aubrey de Grey. And Aubrey de Grey is this long, skinny guy with long hair. And he's one of the probably two best experts in the world on longevity. And when I asked him what his mission is, and he says his mission is to save 200,000 people per day, because this is how many people are dying every day. And apparently it's super hard for him to raise funding. And he doesn't need much. Why is that?
Because he's an arsehole.
Is he?
I've watched a lot of his TED Talks, and he's just very unpleasant. I remember someone in the audience.
So it's personal in excess.
No, I remember someone said in the audience. Someone was in the audience, and he said, "How can I live longer?" And he said, "Well, first of all, you need not to be fat." And it's kind of like that's a pretty tough starting point when you're speaking to someone. Okay. And he's abrasive. I actually think he's super smart.
He is, yeah.
And it's proper deep science that he's going from. You've got Ray Kurzweil, who's also thinking about longevity. You've got a bunch, Peter Attia, who's thinking about it. There's a bunch of people out there thinking about, health span is really what we want. But I think it's more about how he approaches the subject than necessarily the subject itself.
Okay. He broke it down into 7 areas, and he says there are already people living today which will be living up to 500 years old. And his analogy is that we all know there are cars out there which have been built in 1920, 1930, and these cars are still running. And they've been built to live to last for 10 years, but they are still lasting. And he says we can do the same to our bodies. If you take care of your body the same way you take care of your car, old-timer, you can still last much longer. And he broke it down to 7 areas, and it's insightful, but I didn't know it was like a personal thing to him.
Well, I do not know him personally. I've just watched a lot of his stuff. So he may be a lovely guy underneath that, and that's just his stage presence.
He's a scientist, yes. Maria, we discussed a little bit about 23andMe and genomics, which your company is doing as well. Why do you think this is an area which will be super impactful in terms of the health prevention? What are the key points why it is so important?
So one comment about Aubrey. He's actually a really great guy. We spawned it together on several conferences.
He's what, sorry?
He's a really great guy, but he's very straightforward into his answers because, and he's right, one of the main ways to actually live longer is actually to not be fat. I'm sorry, but it's actually true, right? Because you're just accumulating so much, and there are so many now, even new research lines showing that actually the reasons why people even accumulate so much fat, obviously is because you overeat. But apart from that, it turns out that fat actually protects you from different toxins that can actually break and whatever free radicals and so on and so forth, right? Which is why also a lot of times when people do exercise, they hit this breaking point where they just cannot lose any more weight. And now the new research lines are showing that that's because you still have so much toxins, and then that fat, your body's trying to retain it as much as it can, so basically you don't run the risk to have a heart attack or whatever else it is, right, that you might be doing. But that is just on that comment. Sorry, your question was about 23andMe, right?
Yes, Before we go do that, can you please raise your hand if you did your DNA sequence, or if you did 23andMe or any Ancestry? What is the third one? Even the Israeli
My heritage.
Heritage. Raise your hand.
Yeah, DNA
a
fit.
few?
Any.
So basically, you can have your DNA tested for about $100 or €100, and it's actually not the whole genome. It's just part of it, like 0.6%, right?
Yeah, some SNPs.
And they will tell you about who is your cousin and third cousin and fourth cousin, and will tell you about your heritage, like you are this much percent of this tribe or this tribe, and also some health aspects, right?
Yep.
And your company is doing something similar along these lines, or how do you potentially cooperate with companies like 23andMe?
We don't compete. We are building all of the technology they need to automate and scale all of those underlying analysis and do it much better, gaining more insights and so on and so forth. So basically, we do enterprise technology for those companies, right?
So they are your potential customers.
Yeah, a lot of them. They're already our customers, not 23andMe per se, as of it yet. But yes, a lot of direct-to-consumer genetics companies are our customers at this point.
When you look at the genomics and the science behind that, it took about 7 years to sequence the whole genome, apparently in the first, and it costs around $3 billion. And today we can all buy it for below $1,000.
Yeah, about $1,000, or sometimes lower if you get a special offer. But yeah.
So it's incredible how more efficient the technology gets, and companies like yours are helping that.
Yep.
I think when we talk about the company, we had the founder of 23andMe on stage at a conference last year, and actually her sister is the CEO of YouTube. So there are two sisters who run big companies, and actually Google started in the garage of her sister. In the basement was the first office, and she said that her boyfriend at the time, he was one of the co-founders of Google, Sergey Brin, and she actually had him sequenced, and she found out some aspect, like he might be having a propensity to either Alzheimer or Parkinson's. She developed a program, and then her friends started to ask about, hey, this is interesting, we want to have the same, so she built a company around that. That's how it started. When you look at these companies having such a big impact, then the data gets more precise at scale. What do you think could be other impacts which you don't see yet going forward, with companies having huge scale of data, a huge amount of data which we can then analyze and predict?
So in the terms of genomics, what we are seeing right now, and it's going to become the norm, is a lot of populational studies, right? So UK did the first one very successfully. So with Genomics England, basically, where basically they sequenced the first 100,000 UK citizens, and now UK Biobank is doing the same, and they are expanding this to 5 million. And as of January 2019, so this year, as of this January, everyone, like you can order a genetic test through your GP. So UK became the first system on planet Earth that actually introduced that in their general basically medicine.
Interesting.
So that is to say that what we are lacking is good big data on a populational scale, and especially in our hospitals. But now UK did the first one, and they have by far moved further than anyone else. But US is following with different programs, many European countries as well, Gulf countries, Asia and China are looking quite a lot into this. They are doing different stuff as well. So I think there's going to be a lot of data very, very soon, at least in the next 5 to 10 years for sure. And then those data will just inform us much more of about everything, basically.
Okay. Max, when you look at what's happening now in health tech and the massive amount of data, when you discuss and talk about security, what do you think could be the issues around safety and security of the data? Do you think we should protect it better, or it's well protected already?
I find that it's really hard, that question. So that Virgin company, the last one I did was Virgin Insight.
Yeah.
We had all this hospital episode data, which is basically anyone who's been into a hospital and gone through a spell, which is a number of kind of interventions. And the problem there was that the guys in my data team were looking at it, and it was pseudonymized. You could actually pretty easily unpick all of that. So obviously we didn't do that, but you could basically unpick the entire UK to see what diseases they had, what treatments, and how they responded. That's pretty tough. That the second thing that kind of the guy who used to work for me as my chief data scientist then went off to work in Bupa as their chief data scientist. And I was chatting to those guys, and the thing about health insurance, for example, if I know something, if I get my 23andMe and then I actually have to declare stuff that that's about me, and that actually discriminates against me, which then means it increases my premium, that's a really challenging thing for health premium.
Okay.
And so that's a real problem. I also, the third one is Craig Venter, who was the first genome. He published it online, and he says he wished he hadn't. I don't know why he wishes he hadn't.
Mario, what do you think about that? And there's a question here on Slido about in the healthcare industry, how do you collect data in your company? And what do you think about GDPR?
So thankfully enough, we have to deal with other companies. So normally we don't sell directly to consumers, or we don't sell directly to consumers. Yeah. So therefore, there is not that much that we need to be worried about the GDPRs. Our customers, yes, but not us per se, right? What we need to be worried, of course, is about like building technology that is secure, that it cannot be penetrated, that has zero downtime and so on and so forth, right? And currently, actually, that's a great question or good timing, because now we are doing a second sort of like audit with security company where they're doing external sort of like security reviews to our code base, penetration tests, and so on and so forth, right? So we can get further guarantees and have more ISOs and so on and so forth, right?
Okay.
So definitely we need to do that. Again, how do we deal with data? Again, we normally deal with data of other companies. So the data of our clients are the data of our clients, right? So we don't have data from individuals necessarily. Now to your question about like how I personally feel about like, sharing data openly.
Would you?
I would, yes. I don't know how my children will feel about that, because if I give my genome, then everyone will know everything 3 generations above and 3 generations before me,
That's
right?
the crazy part. You can, if you do that, then the intelligence agencies can get data about you
right.
from your siblings, for example.
Yes,
That's
yes.
crazy.
So if I gave my DNA, then we can easily extrapolate the DNA of pretty much all of my siblings and my children and my grandchildren and
wow.
And
you don't have an issue with that?
I personally don't, but that's my point of view. The main reason for that is that at the end of the day, right? We need to accept that, we need this data. Like, there was a huge campaign that was a big advocate, started from the FAR Institute, which is like, data saves life, like blood saves lives, data saves lives,
that's
right?
True.
And we do need more data, right? As a company, we have actually worked with UCL for the Personal Genome Project, which is an open project where you can actually donate your genome, and there are thousands of individuals that have done it. No, it's all open. You can even, like, a lot of people give a lot of information even about their, lives. And we sponsored a lot of those, and we worked with them to make the data, as easily accessible as well for other like companies. You can go even to our website, and we have something we called Open Data, because we support that for free, basically. And you have the PGB collection there, alongside with one of the biggest populational studies for human gut microbiome. And microbiome is another big thing, right? So your bacteria. So. But again, that's me, right? And I totally understand the other side.
Would you be scared of being cloned when your data gets out?
No. The world will be much better with no. I mean, we had these conversations when I'm doing Virgin Health Bank, right? We were storing umbilical pluripotent stem cells, so we were discussing about, the idea is that you can grow organs in the future to replace those of your own, and they're going to be an identical match because they're grown from your DNA. I mean, it's not that much of a jump to then, Dolly the sheep and then Dolly the human. It's going to be a weird world. I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer.
Okay, let's discuss the future, the near future. Maria, they've been in the last like 50 to 70 years. The big trend was cryogenics, to have yourself frozen after you die, and then you're gonna hope at some point people can wake you up. Do you think it's physically possible? Since you're a doctor, you have a PhD, you probably understand this better than us.
Yes. So actually, I was looking at that on when I was like on my early days of research life, where I was just like very passionate about this. So it was one of the research like I was thinking of going on to. We don't yet have the technology, so these things do not really work, right? And we are freezing people or bodies or heads or brains, all sorts of things, in the hope that at some point we'll develop the technology to do something about that. But the biggest problem with that is that, like if you have seen the beautiful crystals of ice, they are very beautiful, but they are also very like pointy, right? So when you do freeze people or body parts, then what happens? Those crystals actually penetrate the cells and they destroy the cells, right? So we need a lot of technology to also restore cells, and we do a lot of stuff, right? So I see it much more possible on the tech side, where we're somehow, we have a microchip that somehow backups our, human brain, and then copies it to another human body, then the cryogenic stuff.
Okay.
Again, science fiction, both things, but if you were to ask me in which science fiction I would invest, most probably on the technology side of things.
Which part on technology side?
That you put somehow a chip on your brain, and somehow that chip makes a full backup of your brain, and then you transplant that chip into another human body or an embryo, and then just copy paste basically your cognition there, right?
Okay.
Again, equally.
Max, what's your bet?
Yeah.
I would probably go down the longevity side. So, rather than either cryogenics or transcribing the brain, I would say actually just living longer is going to be, the Aubrey de Grey stuff, the Ray Kurzweil stuff. That's the stuff that I think will happen first. And I think Ray Kurzweil calls it escape velocity, so that if I can live 10 more years, but life is extended by 15, and then I can live another 5 years, but it's extended by 10, then I can continue to kind of live forever, and then, or certainly live a long time. And at a certain point, then technology will present me with new opportunities. I think that's probably a more likely route than kind of some sort of preservation of me.
When it comes to technologies, so sure, big data is going to help us better understand diseases and how to prevent them, how to treat them. Technology-wise, would you bet on devices, or Maria, you say implants and some pieces of technology into your body? How do you see hardware-based startups trying to affect healthcare and the health prevention? What do you think about this space?
I think Max is much better to answer this. But from my side, from my point of view, I think those startups are needed. Absolutely, right? Just get this gadget, right? Yes, it's not in my body, but it's on me, right? And it's on me all the time, right? And you need those things, right, to some extent. And of course, when you have injuries or when you have accidents, that those then becomes very vital to your survival, right? We have people with Parkinson that, their whole living to some extent exists on getting those implants. Otherwise, they just wouldn't be able to do anything. They wouldn't be able to even be any close of having any normality in their life, right? Let alone enjoy life. So definitely we do need those startups. Now, in terms of investment and fundraising and how easy it is for those companies and what's the strategy, I wouldn't be the expert.
Okay, Max, if you would have a big fund of, let's say, 200 million, what kind of companies would you invest in when it comes to health tech? What industries?
I can tell you the things that I have invested in, which will be maybe kind of indicative. So one was the AI, so using AI. I think, so one of the things I didn't mention right at the beginning is that my mother, my father, and my brother are all surgeons. My parents are retired now.
Okay.
So I'm the weird black sheep doing something strange, which is not medical.
Uh-huh.
A lot of, you really want the people to be doing the high-end, complex, creative stuff. That's why I think there's going to be a lot of use of data to automate things, and automation generally, and that's to some extent what Maria's company is doing as well. That's kind of data automation, but also one of the things my dad has invested in is the robotics company for surgery, because he thinks there's kind of physical automation that's going to be coming along as well, and that's done extraordinarily well, actually, that company. So that one element is automation. That's one investment I did. The second is around genomics. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff as we're going to have much more personalized medicine. One of the elements of personalization is your genetic makeup, and so I think there are going to be elements of genomics. The third company I invested in was called Find Me Cure. That's about the patient recruitment. That is just, it's unbelievable the cost that's associated with taking something from stage 1 all the way through to stage 4 in terms of recruiting and then actually running things and compliance in the tests, clinical trials. So I think, again, just taking a load of cost out there. Another one that I invested in was called Doctor Focused, and what they're doing is saying, actually, doctors have got all of the, a bit like teachers, they've got all of this kind of admin overhead that they have to deal with, and they're just like, make this go away. You can make a lot of that stuff go away if you use technology in a smart manner. So I think there's a lot of kind of digitization of hospitals. There's electronic records. There's been a massive failure, particularly in the US, around electronic medical records, EMRs. I think it's interesting about the UK, and there may be investment opportunities around this, that the data, because the NHS is quite unified here, and so there's one of the reasons why DeepMind is doing their partnerships here rather than the US is because the data's more robust here, or more holistic here than it is over there.
That's true. Yeah. Marian, I want to know about AI, because part of your company, you have a product which is built AI, which you offer to companies. Where do you see, and there's a question from Mark Knight from Slido, where do you see AI in the industry in 5, 10, 25 years? And then maybe you tell us what is your AI element of your company, and then let's go to your predictions.
Okay, so maybe I can start with that.
Yeah.
So our AI engine technology, that's how it's called, the product. What it does currently, so it does a lot of things, but like the two main applications that we're currently using it for is it's able to basically simulate the response of a cell line when you actually administer a drug to it, right? So if you have, for example, drug A, that you know what it does, and you know what disease it targets, right? And then you have drug B and C that, maybe for drug B, you are using it for another disease, and drug C, you have no idea what it does. And then you administer that into another cell line or to the same cell line, and then you measure the response again. Then basically our AI technology is able to reason and say like, okay, how close those responses of different drugs are to known drugs like drug A, and then therefore be able to tell you, to inform you about like, how can you purpose or repurpose existing drugs in terms of like, what disease to target, new diseases, and pathways, and so on and so forth, right? So that is what the main application of it, as of it now, most of our contracts are on that, and our patents now going out. Where I see a lot of AI in the industry in these next 5 years, so federated learning, a lot of that. So for people that are not familiar with federated learning, basically, right now what's happening, we're generating a lot of data, big data, right? Yes. And the problem with big data is that it is being generated in many different places, and they're very big to actually be moving around, and there is also a lot of legal restriction around them, right? So if you cannot move the data, what do you need to be doing? You need to be moving the analysis or the computation to the data. And when that analysis and computation is some sort of learning, it's called federated learning, right? Or federated systems, right? So I see a lot of AI on federated learning, especially in our industry. I think federated learning touches much more sort of like the ops side of things rather than the inside side of things, but like it's very important. Other areas, when it comes to, I mean, everything, drug development and therapeutics, right? We see a lot of that. As I said, we are actually being in part of the drug, I wouldn't say drug development per se, but like drug purposing and repurposing, but then also a lot of AI in the drug development, early stages of like finding different molecules and so on and so forth. Then informing about like different combination therapies, which is very important.
And your predictions in 10, 25 years?
I think it will be 10 to 25 years. I think we're going to be still doing quite a lot of that. There is so much human intervention. So if I was to unify it, right, where the best applications of AI are going to be, I said federated learning is one thing because the data are living in different places.
Yeah.
Another thing is disconnected data that you somehow, so for example, in pharma, right, you have data on cell lines informing you about like how effective a drug is. Then you have on mice, and then you have in human, right? And now you have, some people trying to make decision. Oh, I see this data on cell lines, and I think, okay, maybe if let's go ahead and try to, do the experiments in mice, and then, oh, okay, the mice hasn't died. Most probably we need to take this to humans and clinical trials, and then it fails somewhere there, right? So the problem with this, if you see it, is that you have different data, right, that are sparse, first of all, and they are sort of like, again, disconnected, right? And those are the kind of problems where AI is very good at solving, because AI can take all of this sparse, disconnected data and then basically be able to reason much better and predict much better than humans. And this is just an example, but in the whole industry, there are so many problems that fit into this category that is going to be the dominant for the next 5 to 20 years.
Okay. Max, question for you is also from Slido. What do you think about nanotechnology? Especially when it's implemented into a body. Do you think it's going to be a valid technology, or what is valid journey we should go and invest in, or there are other better ways to do that?
If I'm honest, I don't have enough knowledge.
What's interesting is Bill Gates is now heavily working on toilets, because toilets are in vast majority of the world not so sophisticated, and they can help us. And it's a scalable solution. Once you find something which works, then you can sell it globally. Maria, what do you think about the toilet technology today? And we know that, for example, in Japan, it's super advanced. Here, not so much. Would you, as a philanthropist like Bill Gates, where do you see the path to scalable health prevention?
So actually, you would wish my co-founder was here, because he has very strong opinions about toilets.
Okay.
So some of his opinions, not necessarily mine, are that he would invest all of his money. He's actually said like all of them, or a big part of the money he'll make out of life, he'll invest it into that.
So when you IPO, you know where the money is going from the company, right?
My co-founder's money, not mine.
Not yours, okay.
Let's make that distinction. So he's very much interested in all of these smart toilets to put sort of like mechanism that can analyze microbiome real time, and that can be very informative about everything, your nutrition, your toxin, everything. And actually, there are big, different big car companies where in the next generation of like smart cars, they're going to be actually trying to do the same, where they can put sensors that from the way you breathe and all of your body increases microbes and everything and different other things. So they can capture them, and also the smart cars can actually
there are already companies like this, like for example, navigation companies. They have cameras looking at you as well. And apparently, they can predict in advance before you get a heart attack. They will warn you, so you have time to stop the car and you don't crash.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yes. So this is super interesting. Max, when we talk about this health tech aspect, I wanna ask. You look super healthy, and both of you mentioned nutrition as an important aspect. Are you doing anything proactively today to make sure you stay healthy, or what's your relationship to nutrition?
So
and technology around that.
Like it's like I've teed you up, but I haven't. So there's an online exercise and nutrition program called Kenzai, which I do. I've done it. It's 90-day programs, and I went from the start of it to the first time I did it to being the fittest I'd ever been in 90 days.
Wow.
And it's a combination of exercise. You get personalized exercise every day. You get many, grams that you should eat for the week. You get less than a day. You have to blog. It's a whole bunch of stuff. Got it on an app. I'm going to go. I'm day 76 or something now of this kind of fourth time I'm doing it.
Yeah.
I've lost 6 kilos in the last 2.5 months. I'm probably stronger than I've ever been because this is one focused on weight. But then it just gives me a list of the stuff that I should be eating, and that's what I'm eating.
Interesting. Cool. Thank you for sharing. Now, we have one question here. So let's go through a few questions from Slido because there's a bunch of them, if many. And let's go just a quick like a fire of questions and answers. We have one for you here, Maria, from George Riddick. Are there any clear differences or challenges between setting up a company in healthcare versus any other sector? So you set up a healthcare company. If you compare it to others, because you mentioned earlier that the lean startup terminology or technology doesn't work so much on health. Why is that, and how is it different from any other startup?
So I think it doesn't work in general when it comes to deep tech companies, because in a deep tech company, it takes time to build something, right?
Yeah.
You need to, if you are just using horses, right, you need to build the car before you are able to actually show it to people and get feedback, right? So I think there are a lot of adaptations that should happen to that. So that is, I would say, the number one challenge, but that's universal. I think every deep tech company, and my plan is to write something about those things and learnings. Another big thing on that is like when you are in the healthcare business, most probably you have a lot of regulation. It's a very regulated industry. Even if you are actually being a B2B and not B2C directly, you still have a lot of regulation, even like selling to big pharma, biotech, research government organizations that we have to deal with on an everyday basis. It just takes forever. So then another book I want to write is about how to hack B2B long sales cycles.
Okay. Did you get any grants? It's also
Um,
usually helpful, like Innovate UK, helpful for
we
deeper
did.
tech companies.
Yeah, we did. We have received one Innovate UK grant, and we have applied for a couple.
Okay.
Yeah, so we did. But we also lost grants, right? That's the grants game, right?
Another question for you, Max. What is the main entrepreneur steps before you think to apply for an accelerator? So what do you need to do as an entrepreneur before you apply?
Okay, so I mean, what you really need to do is build a great business, which means that you have, if you're going to go down the co-founding route, be with people who are exceptional human beings who you're working with. You want to demonstrate that you can get shit done fast. You'll probably have raised a friends and family around at least. Some of our corporate accelerators, we're kind of taking companies that have kind of completed their Series A, but kind of the minimum you would have some sort of certainly you'll have some MVP. Ideally, about half of the companies that I was accepting had some revenue. Some indications around problem solution fit, even if you haven't got product market fit. It's unlikely you have product market fit, but you should have some sort of sense. Well, there's founder market fit. That's the first one, which is why you versus anyone else in the world. Why are you going to succeed?
That's interesting. Can you elaborate?
Gone are the days. So 2008, you could say, I don't know anything about this, but nor does anyone else. So it doesn't matter. I'll just build this business. Now, all of those businesses have been built. And so now this is why you're seeing deeper tech stuff like this, someone with, really, really deep tech. So that's the first stage is why are you going to succeed versus anyone else in this particular market? So that's founder market fit. The next one then is problem solution fit. So that is this a real problem? Who am I selling to? Who's my target audience? And is this at least one of the top 3 things that they feel pain about? And are they willing to pay you for the solution of that pain? And then have you got some form of solution for it, even if it isn't packaged properly? then you're into the side of saying, okay, product market fit.
Okay.
Just the final bit on applying to accelerator. If you want to get into an accelerator, go and find out who the MD of that accelerator is and find a way to network to them. If you've got 1,000 applications and only 10 are getting in, it's really, really unlikely you're going to get in. So you need to speak to that person directly.
Cool. And like Maria said, you know, when Maria met Max, you talked and you kind of kept in touch, and then it helps, I guess, right, as well. So next question is for Maria. Maria, have you had to deal with any resistance dealing with sensitive data sets like HES? I know what HES is. Okay, and hosting software, etc., in cloud services. If so, how?
All the time. All the time. Like,
and how do you deal with it?
There are so many different ways you deal with it, right? A lot of time that involves signing a lot of papers and then talking to a lot of people. This is how you deal with it. And then you make sure, of course, like when we sign big contracts with different, you know, pharmaceutical or biotech companies right, we need to have certain, you know, we have, for example, we always have like, you know, like procurement, and we have like security checks, and we have like technical discussions where we need to actually show, you know, how the technology does things, and, you know, and normally those are the people, you know, that plug us internally to those companies and say like, okay, these guys are cool, you know, the technology is solid, we can move on, and so on and so forth, right? So you always have those things. So it's not just data, it's also how you deal with data that you need to also be thinking, right? And all of those are complicated.
Okay, thank you. Max, question for you is, what are the main challenges scaling up to 1 billion after a good product market fit? Like if you see companies who's been through the program and they then scale up, what are the main challenges they have?
I mean, I can talk about it from personal experience because the Virgin Mobile one, but
even better.
So what happens is, to some extent, startups have a period of time where it's pre-product market fit, and the product market fit is where you can sell something in a repeatable fashion. Prior to that, everything's pretty chaotic, and people are very confused because it's very tough to go to work not knowing what your job is, not knowing what you're selling, not know who you're selling to, all of those things. And until you've got product market fit, you don't know that. So there is one universe where you're like that.
Yeah.
Post product market fit, you're in a scaling environment. So then it's like, how do I iron out the processes? So, and the Dunbar number is interesting. So Dunbar was a guy who looked at us as human evolution, and 5 people are the people who are the closest to you, who probably die for. 15 are the ones who are your close friends. 50 is anyone who you'd refer to as a friend, and 150 are anyone who you can have an empathetic relationship. Those are the kind of numbers.
At one time, yes.
And actually, you see breaks in companies as you go through more or less those things. So on the top end, when you're getting, you know, Techstars itself is now 250 people. We have a network of 10, 20,000 people, but about 250 people. And we're seeing some of those breaks come through. And working, so you have to work on culture, you have to work on middle management, you have to work on process. And it's an entirely different mindset than that chaos at the first stage of a business. And that's why you see evolution of people in terms of the management team over time, and why some founders aren't the right people to run large companies.
Okay. Maria, can you tell us what is your main challenge right now, and how do you plan to solve it?
Our main challenge, I mean, we're a startup, we have many challenges.
Yeah.
But the main is, again, at the end of the day, you need to be in the market, you need to be selling as fast as you can, right? And because the industry is complicated, so long B2B sales cycles, so that's by far our biggest challenge. Not because we don't have other equally big challenges, but for all of the other challenges, we have an answer internally that we can influence the pace of that, right?
Yes.
For those, unfortunately, we cannot influence everything, right? And then therefore, it's definitely an area where I'm like speaking God knows with how many people, and always, you know, touching back base with Max, and just like getting as much advice as I can on like how to hack those long sales cycles, right? And that is, if you are in biotech, you are guaranteed to have that. So you better be, you know, buckle up for
Okay.
those things.
Final question for both of you. There is a question slider here. What kind of business book or business books would you recommend for the audience? Max, what do you recommend?
I mean, I would recommend Lean Startup just because you should kind of know the principles and then you can ignore them for what you're doing.
Okay.
Personal story. So I think either just joining Virgin or before Virgin, I had read Losing My Virginity by Richard Branson. By the time I left, I was in it, which was quite cool. Okay. So I highly recommend you read that. So you can. It's a very brief mention, but anyway. What else? The MOM test. Depending on how early you are and how easy it is to test stuff.
Yeah.
Because everyone falls in love with the problem and the idea that's going to solve it, but you need to understand whether it really is going to solve it. So that's a series of recommendations as how to solicit feedback from real humans about whether this is going to solve their issues or not.
Okay.
That's a good one.
Yeah, thank you. Maria, what's your tips?
Okay, so I read a lot of books, almost on a weekly basis.
I hope so.
Yeah. So I would say for me, 2 books are sort of like Bibles. So the one is Extreme Ownership. If you haven't read it, just read it. Especially if you have a company, just read it.
Is it by the Navy SEAL guy?
Yes, it's basically how to develop a culture about of extreme ownership, basically, where it's a culture of doers, where everyone like really gets extreme ownership, right? So if you have read the book, The Hard Things About Hard Things,
yeah.
right? I personally feel that that's rubbish, more or less.
Okay.
I mean, there are some really, really good insights, but I think the distinction between like a wartime CEO and a peacetime CEO is just justifications, right? A wartime CEO, justification for a wartime CEO to be an absolute asshole that screams at people, and for a peacetime CEO to just like get away of doing like stupid mistakes, right? Okay. But the extreme ownership is the exact opposite of that. We're just like, you are in a war, right? Like, why does it matter, the chain of command? Or like if you're screaming at people, what were you going to say? Oh, you didn't shoot twice or 10 times, you should have to shoot. You'll be dead, you are in a war, right? And if you're in a peacetime, you should be preparing for the war, right? So there is no time to waste, right? So I love that book. I will definitely advise it for everyone. And also it has really, really good tips about, which is yet another thing. For me, culture are processes and structure. And that book says on how to put those things. Second amazing book, Do More Faster.
Yes.
From Techstars, yeah.
So Extreme Ownership and Do More Faster.
Yeah. From Techstars, amazing book as well. I think for me, those are fundamentals. Like, do not do a company without those 2 books.
Okay.
My opinion.
And on this note, please join me in thanking Maria Chatzou and Max Kelly.